Wow, what an exhilarating piece of filmmaking. Absolutely brilliant. Congratulations, Anthony. It's a wonderful, wonderful job.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill. You enjoyed it, good.
Well, I like the way you used the camera. It was so fluid and involving. You really felt you were there. And I felt that the scenes when you were concentrating on James Hunt were kind of much wilder compared with a lot of the scenes with Lauder, which were much more measured in the composition. And was that a deliberate choice at the time, or did it just happen that way?
You've been talking to Mr. Howard. No? One of the first things I said to, the first two things I said to Ron, it's the first time we worked together. Neither of us know much about Formula One. I used to go and watch it. Anyway, briefly, the first thing I said to him was I wanted to try and help him to personify these strange beasts they call cars. And that was the most important thing for me, because I think this strange lure, draw they have to people. I was watching at the premiere, there was a replica of a Formula One car at the premiere last week, and every single woman in the house, not only women, also men, but mostly women, I watched posing in front of this car in the most extraordinary positions and the most extraordinary costumes all night. It was high entertainment, and there's something about those cars and the sort of demonic nature. That was the first thing I said to him. And the second thing was Hunt and that kind of debonair, rash, crazed, extraordinary, vulnerable, but sort of attractive man that he was. I don't know whether anybody knew him well in the audience, you never know. And the sort of strategy of Lauder, which is clear in the film. I wanted to kind of make one thing very clear with him, that I kind of regarded Lauder's Nicky's story as a linear process. He just always seemed to, whether it's side or forward or back, it's a linear move with the camera, generally with Lauder, until you get out of control in the racing. But even there, it's not except really to the end, or in Monza when he's suffering. Linear with Lauder, and with James, it was, as a character, it was more like this wolf, this sort of trying not to cage him, but let him push the edge of the frames, and then with the camera slightly out of sync with what he does, so it's slightly more erratic. And it comes through for me because I remember saying it to him, and I know I did it. Obviously the whole process of editing and choice and storytelling, things can get slightly changed.
But did you feel that? Did you discuss this before you started, or did you discover it as you went along, and you sort of felt the performances?
No, it was before. I just read a story. I read a story in Hunt. Obviously, we know. Most English people know a bit about Hunt, or they can find out very quickly. And he was a bit of a social monster. He was wild, and he was amazingly enigmatic and attractive and direct as well. He was wild, and that was one of my first feelings about him. And also when I read Peter Morgan's script, it felt, and spoke to Peter about it, who'd been working on this for a long time, that they're some of the first thoughts I have. And that's really, the beginning of whatever recipe starts to sort of assemble in my head about how to shoot the film. Ron was very open. I mean, Ron comes from, in all respect, he's made some, as we all know, some very, very interesting films, narrative films, humanist, interested in human relations. But he's used to different budgets. He's used to coverage, the word coverage, in a much more acceptable, in my mind, unacceptable, but acceptable terminology. His films are often long lenses and covering all angles, editor demands. And he had the same editors with him over here, who I like very much. But I felt Ron arriving in England, it wasn't just Ron Howard arriving to make a film with a predominantly independent, renegade, solid English European crew, which I think I had on this film. It was also his right-hand man, Todd Halliwell, who's a lovely man, who also has a strong idea about aesthetics, who ran Second Unit and works very tightly with Ron. And his two editors, who are used to were used to working on a certain kind of material. And I come from, amongst others, Danny Boyle, who is absolutely manically insistent in seeing everything that's shot and putting his head in the bins, you know, up to the last day before final cut, and then maybe a couple of days after final cut, to go in the bins again and find something else, which, I mean, to his credit, he's extraordinary. He's insistent on finding everything. And what I felt was a little bit the case with Ron and this very tight team of his. They work incredibly well as a collaboration, as a team. And he relies a lot more on the boys, the editors. So I had to get to know them as well. It's not just about getting to know the director, bonding with him, winning his trust, a man from a very different planet to me. Aesthetically, it was about working with the whole machine. It wasn't ever awkward during shooting, but as they started to assemble while we were shooting, and I was tinkling with other cameras and other formats for a very good reason, because I wanted to get those cars alive, I was noticing that they were completely, acceptably so, but were completely obsessed with the story, making the story work, making the relationship between Hunt and Lauder work, and they barely dipped into the smaller cameras, which were quite a large percentage of the material. They kind of stayed in a special bin. And it was only after sort of letters and encouragement, which was quite delicate for a photographer to the editing room, that it kind of started to assemble itself. But the idea about Hunt, and the movement around Hunt, and the movement around Lauder, and the character of the cars was very basic and upfront for me. Then the hell start, the biggest hellish problem for me on this film, which was probably in that way one of the hardest films I've ever had to shoot, was that I say yes to a film. I'm on the beach in Nice, and I've got the sand in my hair, and there's Andrew Wheaton and Ron Howard with his cap on, and on Skype saying, we got this film, and we're going to go to Monza and Kailami, and then we're going to go to Spain, and we're going to go to Nürburgring, and we're going to go to Brands Hatch, and Brands Hatch is closed. And on it went. I was just hopping on the beach, you know, and cut to a few meetings and some serious conversations with Post and a few other people, and you're presented with a 200-yard stretch of asphalt just south of Watford. And, okay, you might get a day at Brands Hatch, and you might get 2 days in Nürburgring. And so we had to go into the whole world of archive, which is another hellhole, because everything's owned by Bernie Eccleston after 1976, I believe. And that's very difficult and very expensive. We had to hunt and hunt and hunt and hunt, pardon the pun, for everything we could find that was appropriate or semi-appropriate for this season. Finding the correct tracks, which is very difficult on everything from film, 16, 35, telecine, whatever I could find, even Super 8. And then I had to go through a very, I'll just say this briefly, that was our first pact between editorial, me and Ron, and the producers, and Eric Fellner as well, really, that we couldn't choose anything archive without my sort of ultimate acceptance. Sort of, if there's a yellow card or a red card, we had to look at it again. I had to give it back to the Post boys, or take it into CO3, where I was working very tightly with Adam Glassman and the guys there, and try and refurb the material, try and rescan it, mess around with it. Certainly DNEG were involved. And if it didn't pass the test, if it just became too impossible for me to find a quality that I felt like I could work with, it had to go. And that was very painful for Ron sometimes, because we didn't have these tracks, and we didn't have the budget to send 5,000 people down the Straits of Monza. It doesn't exist anymore. The Nürburgring track looks like Jim Morrison's grave in Paris. You know, it's covered in graffiti and so on and so on. So I had to find, briefly, to finalize this, I just had to find, the hardest thing was to find the palette up there, which I wanted, which I didn't want sort of desaturated, depressing 70s, which we all know existed. I didn't want golf ball grain necessarily. I wanted enormous color, but I didn't want the wrong color. I wanted the right color. So I looked very much at the archive for that, and we dismissed the stuff that was useless. We then assembled a library which we quizzed each other about. Said, that's the stuff, that's the stuff, that's the stuff. And then I had to, working with Russell's cameras that are pretty high end compared to some of the stuff that was shot on the archive, I had to try and find this area, this terrain in the middle where I could bring down the Alexa, the RAW, bring in the Canons, bring in the Indicams, which are the small onboards, the Phantom, etc., etc. I pulled in lenses that, amongst others, we had the S2s, we had the Baltars, which I think were reminiscent of Gordon Willis, Godfather. A lot of other things.
What was your main
that was the idea.
then?
Well, the main camera was the Alexa on Codex on RAW. Had about, I can't remember, Russell. Yeah, there you go. There's a big three. Three of them. We had a Phantom on dailies. We had I utilized a company out of Vienna called Indicam, who had these small cameras that were reasonably robust. The C mounts, the small, they had to be small to get on these cars. I started as we started to build the prototypes, which are Formula 3 cars, jigged and built to look identical to Formula 1. That's all we could afford. That was expensive enough. I then started with some close friends of mine drilling, finding secret places in the cars to place recording units and stuff like that. The whole cars became hot sets, and ultimately we ended up drilling a bit in the Formula 1s. It was incredible, but they're historics and they're worth millions. But
yeah, and the vibration and the movements with the camera, with the speed and the jolts and the bumps and everything, was that real or was that juggled data?
No, it's real. It's real, and I think I've put 260. Is Adam Glassman here? Is Adam here? No, he's not. I put about 260 camera moves in the post with agreement with the editors, which is quite a deal. But after the final cut, because the original idea of me having these cameras on the car was good enough, and I tried to put sliders on, and we have these moves that are generic, that are real moves on the cars traveling 100 miles an hour. But there were many shots I just could not create a move. It's physically impossible. So I locked them in, and then I framed this where I knew I could then create more moves. But the violence and the sort of vibration and the shaking and the combination of that and the moves are emotional, really. They're just what those cars are. They're terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. It's great fun.
And when you get to the final race, how did you cope with all the rain? I mean, how did you create all that?
If there's one thing we didn't have any problem with, it's the rain. And we kept saying, we sort of get there in the morning, we get there nice and early, and the weather forecast will be good. It's another English summer. And we'd be ready for Monza and Brazil and whatever. The Archive shot of Brands Hatch, actually where he goes over the line, which is a lovely 35 shot. That's Archive. We've changed a few things and changed the car, but you know, we needed sun for certain things, which I was committing to. Monza, of course, et cetera, et cetera. Fuji, it pissed down. And if there was one thing we could get, it was every other day. It was chucking it down. So we just look at each other, Ron and I, and say, "Okay, let's go to Monza." Let's go to Fuji. You know, and off we went to Fuji. And when I was shooting in Donington, which was officially our Fuji, which was towards the end of the shoot, we had like about 8 or 9 weeks of drama and more bit of racing, but not at Crystal Palace we did early on. But most of it was like drama and the scenes that we had to get done. And then we had a 5-week race unit, which was massive. I think that's about it, Russell. We got extra cameras in. I had enormous extra power in the form of shooters. Had half of Top Gear around me, and it went on and on and on. Some great shooters. And I had the drivers racing themselves with cameras on the Mule, I called it, which is a Formula 3 car, with the front mount and the back mount, because they were the best operators of all, because they do erratic things that only a racing driver can do. As shooters, we tend to think it's like this, and you end up doing something that negates what's happening already. We had Russian arms, which I threw out after about, no disrespect to Russian arms, but I threw the Russian arms out after about 2 spin to unit attempts. I just couldn't stand it. It was just taking all the life out of the cars. It was just, what I saw was half the physicality of the cars gone. Amazing technical ability the Russian arm has. I saw a car traveling at 100 to 120 miles an hour, 14 inches away from a racing driver, and all I could see in his face was the, oh, fuck, I've got to keep this car in a straight line, otherwise we're all going to die. And I could see it in his eyes. So you've got a guy in the helmet thinking more about, let's just stay on line so we don't die instead of performing. Or you know. So I pulled all those things and really lent on the onboards, as we call it. Shot a lot of Evo systems, you know, the incredible, some of the vehicles we can travel at speed with 120 miles an hour, and I was strapped in with Telfer with these sliders on the cars, trying to see the race unfolding behind me, and then trying through remote controls to move cameras across in the race, which was extraordinary, actually. That was inspired by Frankenheimer. That was when there was no health and safety. Anybody from health and safety?
I'm sure there are a lot of people with questions. Who would like to start off with a question?
I'm not going to say anymore.
Yeah.
Well, Anthony, first of all, congratulations. Really fantastic. Really, really very good. You talked when you first started about grain the size of golf balls, and I was quite interested by the grain texture that you got on this picture. From the main unit, obviously the drama stuff which you did on the Alexas, but you seem to have achieved, and I presume that's part of your work with Adam, a real consistency in terms of just the right amount of grain on the screen. Because I love that. I mean, you don't want the pictures too smooth. You want to get you want something in there that gives your eyes something to bite on. So, was that a lot of work? Did you add a lot of noise? Did you do noise? How did you cope with that?
It's 3 weeks grade, more or less. Everything was done before, in the sense that I kind of, because it was so critical to get that palette right with Ron, a person I never worked before, and other American, background. It was done before, where I did extensive tests with Adam at CO3, building on the archive and then shooting other stuff. Nick Coulter, who may not be here, but Nick helped me in the pre-shoot. I couldn't be there, I kind of oversaw it, but he was there to help. And some of his shots, a couple of shots got through. We took that material, and I took at least 2 or 3 formats, partly Alexa, and then took them into Adam and manipulated hard and tried to push. And I utilized some of the plug-in noise reduction. I utilized a lot of diffusion that I use. I utilized extremely old glass on extremely modern image capture systems. And I utilized ARRI relativity noise reduction, which is annoying because it's still in a separate room, which really pisses me off, instead of getting it in the grade, in the windows, which is the only way you should ever really work. But I'm a bit of a beast in grading, and I love that. This film was, for me, a combination of sexy 70s, atrocious clothes, but it's nice, and the colors. And as I said earlier to Billy, I was looking at particularly Monaco, which was sunlit, good archive, where you had this kind of these green yellows and these cyans and this beautiful blue Mediterranean and stinking hard red, and a lot of stuff is gone. A lot of stuff is gone. And I tend to repeat myself a bit from film to film, but I kid myself that the films I shoot are a bit different each time. But I am a bit of a fan of countering this sort of extraordinary resolution and definition of modern camera systems. But I am extremely dependent and attracted by their latitude. So I like the latitude. I want the latitude in the camera as best I can. I don't like burning anything out in principle, but then I just want to take it somewhere else afterwards, but have control. And as I said, innately, this archive stuff has a different definition. It tells a story. It communicated the story very well, in 1976 and 1974 and 1982, and we've just gradually gone up the mountain of as we know, of definition and et cetera, et cetera. And I just wanted to put it back there, but I didn't want the desaturation. I wanted lush, violent, visceral colours of that period.
The film's got a wonderful texture to it. It feels of that period. It doesn't feel like modern technology, and that's where I think you've succeeded very well. I think that's great. But I noticed you used a lot of direct light rather than soft light. To me, it worked because it was more dramatic. And I know, a lot of people favour soft light now, but I think with this subject, the use of direct light without diffusion on the lamps gave you a much more sculpted look.
It's violent.
That was a deliberate choice from the beginning, was it?
I think it's underlying violence, sex, violence, fate, vulnerability, all the things I kind of associate with that. It's no coincidence that when you go to then and now, when you go to motor racing, it's not like Ascot 100 miles an hour, but it's all dressed up and there's a lot of sex, there's a lot of fashion, there's a lot of models, there's a lot of, you know, the stars are all there, and it was that in the 70s as well. And I used to try and get into the paddock and the pits at Brands Hatch and Silverstone, and with my freckles and my hair down to my knees, and with my ice cream, and I couldn't even afford to get in there. But you'd see I remember all these models and the panache and the colours. And when you pull the cockpit off, it's just a bloody bomb. You know, and I'm used to that. I used to be like in awe if I could get anywhere near the pits and the paddock. And now I've been privileged enough to be surrounded by these Formula 1 and Formula 3 and Formula 5000 geeks for 6 months. And I'm sitting on the cars and pulling them apart and hiding things in them. And you realise when that colour and that number and that bit of sponsorship and Duckham's or Durex or whatever it is comes off, it's just a bloody bomb. And you can't even get in the Formula 1 and drive it unless you're a serious driver, because you'll kill yourself, because you have to put your foot down, otherwise it don't move. I had to go into Formula 3, which was terrifying, but it was great. But these cars are insane, I think. Then they were exhausted. When the guys came out of the cars in Monaco, a lot of people know more about motor racing than me. When they used to pull these guys in the 70s out of the races after Monaco, they're so physically exhausted they have to lift them out, because the brakes and the gear changes and the Monaco and the harness, and you know, they were sort of physically devastated after 2 hours of it.
Would anyone else like a question? Yes, there.
In terms of the choice of colour for various scenes like the hospital and yellows and so on, was that something you discussed with Ron, or was that just something you threw into the mix?
No, the tricky thing about this is, and Ron, well, I'm not going to say this without chopping my legs off. You know, it was always going to be a film that was going to go predictably and generally perhaps come alive on the track if we got it right. You still have to get it right. And I was depressed at the thought of sticking lots of helicopters and long lenses just swish-panging by. But that said, there's a lot of drama to get through, and one of the first things Ron said to me was like, you know, everybody, when I'm doing sex, people just call me up and laugh at me. You got to help me out here, Anthony. He said to everybody, so you got to help me out. It's sex. And I don't do sex really. It's really funny. He's a fantastic humorist, and we have these scenes, a bit of sex. We have the nurse, all the cliches, you know, and not a particularly good location actually there. But I struggle a bit in places. With the pace, which is not what you're asking. With the pace, I struggle a bit with in places, but I think there's a logic to that, because he knows he's going to, when the piston starts going and he has intercourse in the toilet and the plane, it kind of goes from there, really. That's it for Hunt. He's had it. But perhaps to appreciate that with what we can give in the second half of the film, you have to have sustained or withheld a bit back. It's like a lot of things in life. I've never been very good at that. As far as the colours are concerned, I didn't want it just to go pop into the world of Formula 1 and bump. I wanted it to try and, I don't know if it's right, but try and get it into that inevitable colour palette, which is like I said it before, it's this kind of reversal. You remember the reversal? Obviously, you've had the privilege of shooting Technicolor, Billy. I haven't, you know. The day we can get this stuff and these modern sensors to perform like Technicolor, I will be overjoyed. But I kind of wanted that clarity in a slightly physically vulgar way. So you have to bring those colours across into the drama scenes as well. So I just work very closely with costumes. Fantastic costume design on this, Julian Day and his wife. I work very closely with costumes. I work very closely with design and anything, really. Just get my nose into everything. And hopefully there's a logic to it.
Yes?
I wanted to ask about your workflow. You have the ARRI and you have all these other cameras, and did you set your look on the thing? Because that's obviously counterproductive to the speed with which you want it to work. So how complicated was the workflow for all the different cameras?
Like I said, the basic palette was designed and agreed upon before we started, so I knew roughly where I wanted to take it. We then had one of the good things about this film, we had a German spend. And I've worked a lot with Germans, and I knew a lot of people in Germany, and we were going to shoot in Germany for part of the shoot, only a small amount, but we had to go there. So he got in touch. I talked to the producers, Andrew Eaton, and said, you know, he asked me, how can you spend money? Do you want to bring crews in? And I didn't mind bringing crews in, but I wanted to keep a certain British or local, for many reasons, economic as well. But post is a separate thing for me, and I wanted to keep the grade in London because I knew Ron was going to do, I thought then, his post in London. It ends up he goes to Berlin and I'm in London. But he was in LA anyway. I never saw him. Anyway, we had a German spend, so I got hold of this company called Cinepost. I think it was Cinepost. They had a 2K cinema on wheels. It's about the size of a Sprite Major. Well, it's about 2/3 of the width of this room. A trailer that followed me around Britain and then went to Germany. And I had a fantastic, I had to school them. They weren't my graders. And I was working in list layers. I was working with the dailies, with graders I'd never met before. They worked around the clock. I had my DITs on set, I had the Wranglers, I had QC, quality control, etc., etc. But then for the first 3 weeks of shooting, I then went into this straight after, started in Whitehall. We were shooting in London. I remember Tony Blair was giving a speech somewhere down in Whitehall, that famous unit base we always have down by the Horse Guards. And I went in after shooting about 12 hours. I walked into the cinema with these two guys and had my pizza and a beer and started grading with them to guide them in for the dailies. I remember going in there and the town was full and like I spent about 4 hours in there. The location guys were kicking the door saying, we're moving, you know. And I came out and the whole place was deserted. The police were gone, everyone was gone. And I'd been in this weird little limbo land of the cinema for 4 or 5 hours grading. But I basically, for the first 3 or 4 weeks, guided them in, certainly 3 weeks, to get the dailies right. And so everybody was happy. And that was it was a good way of working for this film. There was never any discussion. People would come and go from different financing bodies. Occasionally we had issues with second unit or Splinter, or we wanted to check something, and you had this cinema with about 5 or 6 seats, occasional beer and a pizza, and these two guys working around the clock. They looked like aliens when we finished the shoot. And everyone, we travel, I get in the car, I was looked after, privileged. You get in your Merc and off you go, and I wake up in the next set, and there it is. I've been traveling all night, behind some German kind of half lorry that tugged the damn thing around Britain. And the guys were there. They came out, opened the door. They looked like, zombies from 28 Days Later. And we got through like that. And it gradually went further and further down the line. They got better and better. And that was our turnaround of dailies. I just got it on a USB stick, and if I wasn't working with them. Not complicated. You say it's complicated. It wasn't. Yeah. It wasn't.
Were you doing this because of the pressure from the production, or were you doing it because you for your own satisfaction? I mean,
absolutely for my own satisfaction. I wasn't in the least bit interested in worrying about that. If there was an issue, I'd have known it, of course. I'm in the same situation now with a new film with Ron, and it's a clear, clean studio film, and it's Warner's, and I'm hearing new voices, and the corridors are longer, and there's a few different things that go on. But there's more pragmatism and debate and agreement. But in this case, it wasn't that. It was just getting it right and then making sure I could maintain it. Keep it up, keep everybody in the zone, keep the editors, again, as I said, keeping the editors in the space. And I tried very hard to match these odd little cameras. It was significantly poorer in resolution, but match them as best I could so they understood that at least they were there for them,
So you cut down the definition on the Alexa then sometimes to match the...
Not officially. I didn't change the resolution of the camera or anything like that. I just, already when you put flare and Baltar lenses from 1960, S2s, sometimes I use diffusion. I work, it's also the angle of the light, as you say, direct, and sometimes I had a lot of flare. I had a lot of light going to the lens a lot of the time when I could. I couldn't control, some days with 20 cameras, I can't do it, but I tried.
And the scenes when he's in hospital and hallucinating, how did you do that?
That's when he gets out of his accident. It's all shot on minicams and plastic bags, and there's a few socks. There's a bit of underwear on the camera, some thin nylons, anything I could find in the bin, some rubber gloves, all sorts of stuff, hard light, colours, hard grading, intercut with Alexa and Indycams. It hops all the way through. I'm really happy you're not disturbed by it, at least, because it is one consistent, perpetual orgy of about 6 formats. So...
The question at the back.
Hi, Anthony.
Hello.
Hello. Just wanted to go back to your early point, knowing your work and being a fan of your work, and not personally being a fan of Ron Howard's work.
What was and you admitted to not being a fan of motor racing, or knowing, what was your attraction? What did you feel you could bring to working with someone like Ron Howard, and what made you feel that he saw in you? The only thing I knew about Ron Howard was Happy Days, which we all know, and A Big Smile, Red-Headed Planet like me, and Bryce. I know his daughter from Mandalay. And my old teacher, about 12, 15 years ago in Denmark, went and shot Far and Away and a couple of other films, Mikael Salomon. That's about what I knew. And yeah, I haven't been a big fan of his. I'm a big fan of especially Frost Nixon, and the third act. I think it's like amazing. And I think Apollo is amazing. I think Russell's a bit over the top in Beautiful Mind, but there are things about it I love. And there are also, I personally think, blimey, one camera, but less successful films. And I also think visually they have been less noticeable. Not that we're meant to be noticeable, but I just felt they were less adventurous. That said, I didn't think about that when the script comes through the door. I just spend my life hoping the right script comes through the door, like we all do. And when this one came, I kind of felt it was I used to go and watch Jackie Stewart. I was saying to him last week, I met him finally and told him I forged his autograph 3 times, so he didn't need to sign anything for me. He was a lovely geezer. And I used to watch him with my ice cream, and the cars flying. I didn't know that much about motor racing, but that said, it was Ron, it wasn't about Ron, it was about the script. And it's not always about Peter Morgan's script, because Peter writes things sometimes in quite a cardboard fashion. It's clear what he wants to say, but it has to be moulded. And I think Ron is actually very intuitive at that. I think he's very good with actors. Obviously, actor friendly. He's been an actor all his life. He's extremely, extremely pleasant man. He's to come for me as a sort of Euro, I don't know what you can call me, Euro trash arty filmmaker, and get so close to Hollywood royalty. And when I'm calling my mates about, the bender we had last week and the drinks, he's calling Marty and Lucas and Tom Hanks and there's me, has the same kind of conversation, same, it's his buddies. So it's a long way away from where I've been, but he just, the bridge was very short, it was very easy. So then it's Ron, and then I sit down and think about the guy I'm going to make the film with and the team with him. And we're going to make an indie film, and I'm thinking, Jesus, the budget of this, it's bigger than most of the things I've done, and we're going to die making it if we're not careful. And it was exhausting, and it was an enormous achievement from a lot of people on this side. As a real credit to I think, really a big credit to a lot of English filmmakers. Fantastic work. But he wanted to go there. He also clearly wanted to go somewhere else. And I think Andrew Eaton and Fellner they considered other people than me. I know they spoke to other DOPs, and I was just the lucky one that said the right thing about forging autographs in the interview and got it. And then we just, our relationship grew very quickly, and I've just learned to be very direct. The more different people are to me, I've just learned to be incredibly direct very quickly and put your head on the block. And then if you're out, then it's best for it.
Did he give you a lot of freedom as to where to put the camera then?
He gave me total freedom. He listened. He's always got an idea. It's the same with Danny. I mean, Danny is one of the most clearly, clear about what he likes, but if you have an idea, he'll listen to it and he'll take it. And it doesn't have to be just me; it can be anybody, down to the cleaners, And Ron's the same. But he was in a new area for him. Clearly, as you mentioned, if you look at his films, they're less exploratory. And so it was a trip for him. It was fun, not only what I was doing, but what the cars themselves, and working in Europe, changing locations, shooting different formats, running around from one camera to the other. He loves that. Multi-shooting. He loves it, and he's there with the monitor, and he's by the camera. He's a joy. He's a real joyful, lovely, playful person. Wasn't difficult at all. He was very trusting.
Another question? This lady?
So the big thing on something like this is always second unit, which gets to do the action stuff. So how much did second unit do with Todd?
No, it's it was very evenly balanced. The most I was all over the louder crash, which was very explicit and had to be absolutely precise. It's on the spot. It's a replica, really, and it was very difficult to do. I did all of that. Like the turning over the car in Monza is the boys in post. I just set it up and do all the packaging around it, and then that could have been me. It could have been Michael Wood, who I worked with on second unit. But I think really we worked together. It wasn't really that. It's not that much. You call it action. I don't think it's much action. All the kind of actiony, visceral stuff on the car. I controlled all that because they're so odd, and I'm so particular about where and how I want to use those small cameras. I don't really want anybody else to do them. I had a guy called Amit, who was a second AC from Germany, one of the German spenders, who had a real keen eye, and I thought he was lovely, so I kind of sensed that and bring him up, gave him a Canon more and more, and asked him to be like the struggling spectator. I just said, spelt it out, struggling spectator, struggling, and struggle to catch that car. And I didn't want any of this, refined stuff. I was struck by some of the archive stuff. Was it immensely unglamorous when a head comes off, sadly, or a car goes into a bush? Very often the camera's not there, it's just there in the wrong lens for obvious reasons. You're not waiting like a hawk to see somebody lose a life. So I taught him about that, so the camera's struggling. And I practiced that myself, and my operators, Ali Ray and Michael, and all the other operators. And every now and then I had like I said, I had the guys from amongst other programs like Top Gear. And those guys, I thought, they can do something. They know the lenses. They're not that special. But you watch them just walk off, and I send them off in a position on the track. And just the fact they move 6 foot or 20 foot to the left or the right, they just know actually where the shot really does get special, especially with the long lenses. They're very clever, and I learned a lot from people like that. But there was no special segregation of action to one and the other. They clean up a bit. The film I'm doing now is a clear case of them cleaning up. I set up scenes, and I'll be shooting 2 or 3 days, and then they'll come in and clean up where we get stuck. But they are shooting scene 1, which is horrifying for me. Horrifying.
Another question?
Yes. Just an extension of that question about the look. Did you feel that Ron was on board for the look from the beginning? Because obviously it's very visceral, very raw, and obviously not very like the stuff he's done before. Did you feel that really that he came to that point before the shoot started, or do you think he came to that point, once the shoot had already started?
No, he was there before, but it took that parliamenting, it took that pre-shoot exchange, talking about the script, gaining trust with each other, doing that testing with Dean Egg, Jodie Johnson. Also, him knowing, he's wise enough to know that he had no choice as far as being dependent to a certain extent on archive material. Then what I had to talk to him about was, I didn't want it to bump, because I think a lot of people could have shot this film and it would have been different, and quite a lot of people would have shot it and it might have bumped more, or they might have stayed with the modern format and then let it go into documentary, or there were 101 ways of making any film, and I just was very honest about what I felt I wanted to do, and I never really felt any problem. He probably had a few clandestine conversations with his editors, in the Charlotte Hotel with Todd after I'd gone out of the room, but that's life. But he was there. He was there and he was excited. And the other guys behind him, Cross Creek, Brian Oliver, never any problem.
Because you said that the shoot almost divided into 2 parts. You said you did the early stuff, the early driving stuff, but then you did all the drama, and then the driving stuff.
Correct.
So in terms of an assembly, you're almost ending up with a very different film with the dramatic scenes before you've even put the pacing and the energy of the driving into that. We
started with drama, started with a bit of sex. That was quite early on, terrifying. And the nurse, of course. Then we did Crystal Palace, but we only did some of Crystal Palace. And you're correct that the main race unit, which we knew would incorporate more cameras, more equipment, a special approach, more walkies. We had to wet down bloody Donington. We had to wet down Cavill Park. We had to wet down these Snetton. It's absurd. The budget was not big, and we had to work out a nightmare for the producers to work out where to put the cards. You're right, we had to separate that down, but we gave them enough. We shot enough racing, and they also used bits and bobs of what I knew was not going to make it through. Something I found really repellent, some of the stuff that was in the pre-shoot, which was just testing. Absolutely nothing to do with, Nick Coulter. It was just that, we were just shooting anything to explore. The pre-shoot was about investigating onboards, coverage camera, helicopters, Russian arms, pursuit vehicles, blah blah blah, and whatever else we could find. And we got enough of that done. And every time I had a test, I tried to show him things, and then I'd take that into the cinema on wheels and grade it and say, well, have a look at that. And it would go in and out, so they had something to play with. But you're right, they were kind of yearning for the stuff, which is probably why they did spend so much time fiddling around with the drama. So, pardon me, only script writers here. But it never really felt dyslexic. But we did go out with a bang. It was bloody mad the last 3 weeks. I think you came up to us, Russell. I don't think we even spoke. It was madness, wasn't it? It was plotted absolutely mental. Mental.
Another question? No?
Yeah, one.
Yes, one?
No, he's coming.
Could you speak up?
Had budget and sort of the circuits and the cars not been a financial issue, do you think you might have gone more Frankenheimer's route and been tempted to strap the camera to the car and get longer periods of just sort of fixed camera racing?
We strap more cameras to cars than Frankenheimer. It's just what the editors get excited about. It's just about where we are in this epoch of jittery storytelling and delivering a certain amount of chaos and storytelling at a certain pace. I think it started with MTV, not to be boring, but I think it started there and it's gone through a whole, third of a century of stress and what the audience want and what kind of audience. If you sent, a large, I would argue, a large percentage of our contemporary audience into a Frankenheimer film, they'd snore or they would get up and walk out. Because it's just a difficult thing. I'm not saying any disrespect to Frankenheimer. He did things that you can't do today. He rigged film cameras behind the head of Jackie Stewart, who's one of the most expensive heads in Formula One, to name one. They had rigs that you would never be allowed to do. You'd have health and safety breathing down your neck. So I had to find ways of putting cameras on cars, not because Frankenheimer did it, but he was right. That was where the money was. But it's also how you do it, because I look at Formula One occasionally. I looked at a bit of NASCAR, and I looked at Formula One sports cams, and nothing bores me more. And it's a sport, and the camera's a sport, and the focus is everywhere, and it's information, and it appeals to the intellect and entertainment. But it wasn't, for me, emotional, sensual, fearful, artistic in any way whatsoever. It's sports cams. So there's lots of that going on, and you can do it today with other cameras. You just have to accept the drop down in generally speaking, in a certain amount of resolution, unless you put a bigger camera on. But then you've got to realize a guy's got to drive that car 150 miles an hour with a fucking great Alexa in his face. Think about it. It's dangerous.
The picture's got obviously tremendous pace, and the way you use the camera and the way it's been edited, it's full of energy until you come to the tire changes. Yeah. And compared to today, they seem to be taking forever to change a wheel and to have a long conversation before they move off again.
Those guys were slow. I mean, I've never seen, our first AD was Lee Grummett. He was whipping the hell out of those guys. And they were actors and day players, but they were now having to change these tires. And that's why there's a lot of cuts around the tires, because you have to get it right and it has to look real. And it did take longer then, of course. But my God, it was horrifying. About a day before Principal, I came over and oversaw a tire change with Italians, and it was hilarious. They had the right hair. They looked great, the yellow shirts, but fuck.
One last question. Yes, Peter?
I think you've succeeded in capturing the spirit of Formula One racing in the 70s, and I'm old enough to remember what it was like. Is there anything that you feel, in hindsight, disappointed that you weren't able to do that you originally set out and wanted to do?
I still haven't been in Monza. As a person, being in Nürburgring was like unforgettable. It was the most disturbing place on earth. It is the graveyard. It was like Caspar Friedrich meets the gods. It was really spooky. I think I think we've kind of, as far as the film is concerned, we've done what we could do. I can't obviously judge it as completely neutral person as you can sing it first time. I would have loved to. I would like to have driven a Formula One car, but I know I'd probably kill myself. And I would have liked to have gone to Monza, and I did want to go to places. I mean, I've been to Monaco several times, but it would have been nice to be shooting there. But there's nothing to shoot. You know, we'd have 3 and 6pence and a couple of runners, and everything's changed. And we've been stuffed, you know. So we couldn't really do anything but just do what we did. I think the most rewarding thing for me, I actually get quite emotional about this film, which means the drama works. It's not just about motor racing. It was always the drama and two men. I think Morgan detects that in his characters. He did it with, I worked with him on Last King, which is way back now, and it was a different kind of story, but it's still two men. He's done it with The Deal, with the Tony Blair story, Gordon Brown. He's done it with Frost Nixon. He writes these things about two people or pillars staying in the place too long, and I'm interested in that kind of drama because I spent my time in a couple of relationships like that. And I think it's interesting, and that's what kind of motivates me, amongst other things, in his work. This is a real story. I find myself getting quite moved, even though I've met Nicky lots of times now, and I've seen the film and shot the damn thing and seen every frame of it and the grading. It's obviously, I'm pleased, I think, because it's a human drama, and I think that's ultimately what motivates me. And I'm not very good at jetpacks and superheroes, really. These are kind of heroes for me anyway, but the ones with the batteries on the back flying around, I'm not so good at it. I tend to nod off when I'm reading the script, you know. So I'm happy with this, really.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you for a wonderful evening.
Drinks. Thank you. Thank you.